please note that we are recording this. And hopefully working with Jill and others to put this on things like Clean Water Academy. We are doing 2 of these sessions, doing one today and we're doing one next Tuesday. Both sessions will be basically the same. Just wanted to give folks 2 opportunities for dates for anybody that may have a conflict. We're scheduled to go for 2 hours this morning. Basically, we want to walk you through the basics of what we currently know for the Ag Conservation Assistance Program. We're currently in program development for this. We didn't get this information and this guidance until the second week of July. On July 11th, when we came back in the office, we had a state budget, had a new program, so we began taking a look at this ACAP program in July. So we've been spending mostly the last 3 months taking a look at what the law said, taking a look at what the parameters were for the program, and starting to begin to roll it out. So what you'll see today is basically what we know to date and what we're thinking about. We still have a lot of unanswered questions, and we realize that. We currently have 2 staff that are working on this, basically Eric Cromer and myself, but we're moving to fill some spots and get some other people in to help us out with this. So basically this morning we want to go through a couple of documents. We want to go through the policy document that we have here. This is basically our speaking notes that we've used with the commission and other groups, and would encourage you that if you're not muted, you need to make sure that you mute yourself. Getting a lot of background noise from
peppers. Reached up a little bit.
Folks, if you're not muted, please mute. So I want to go through this document, which is basically 10 pages that gives you kind of the overview of where we're at. We want to go through what the proposed apportionment of funds would look like. And we also want to go through some examples to begin helping you think through about what resources you'll have in your particular county to be able to start thinking about what this program might look like in a particular county. So Eric, before we get going, anything that I didn't think of here?
No, I think you pretty much have it covered.
Okay, we're going to walk through this. If you have comments, please put them in the chat. We will stop periodically throughout the morning as we go through this material. But we want to try to get through the material, then we'll ask for questions. So if you have questions, either jot them down on a piece of paper and wait to the point where we open it up for questions, or certainly feel free to put them in the chat. But with this number of folks on the line, it's going to be difficult just to have an open forum and an open chat. So we will give you an opportunity to raise those questions, and we will stop as we go through some of this material. So the document that you see on the screen currently is basically a set of speaking points. It's our policy notes on the ACAP program. This is a program that was created as a part of the Clean Streams Fund. And for folks that aren't familiar with the Clean Streams Fund was created as a part of the 2022-23 state budget. It's a historic investment to reduce non-point source pollution in the Commonwealth streams, rivers, and water bodies. And it addresses as a fund not only agriculture, but urban stormwater, acid mine drainage, abandoned mine lands, and also has some funding in there for tree planting along streams and rivers. So the Clean Streams Fund, as a new fund, was appropriated $220 million from federal funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. So the overall fund received that initial allocation of $220 million. Also, as a part of the state budget, they created the Agricultural Conservation Assistance Program. The purpose of ACAP is to assist farmers and landowners in the design and the installation of ag BMPs that will prevent or reduce nutrient sediment pollution from their farms and improve water quality and soil health across the Commonwealth. So by law, the commission is administering this act, and the commission may also delegate certain duties and responsibilities under the act. As a part of the budget, we did receive an initial allocation of $154 million. That's 70% of the Clean Water Fund is going to ACAP. And that's a percentage that's in the law and it's set by law. So if any new funding were to come through for Clean Streams Fund, ACAP would continue to get some additional funding. Commission also received an additional 10% or $22 million from the Clean Streams Fund to supplement our Nutrient Management Act through the Nutrient Management Fund. So there are some hard stops on this money, and it's a one-time allocation. This is not a $220 million every year for the next number of years. It's one shot of $220 million. And the legislation that we have, or the parameters that we have, is that the funding must be committed by the end of December 2024, and it must be spent by the end of December in 2026. So keep in mind those two hard stops that we have on the funding, both for commitment and for spending. So the commission, as the entity designate to administer this, will have to do a number of things. We'll have to develop guidelines to administer the program. We'll have to allocate funding out to the districts. We'll need to designate ag BMPs that would be eligible for funding. We're going to need to work in establishing training and education and technical assistance components of the program. We will have a reporting, a data collection and reporting for ACAP projects. And right now we're saying that we believe that that reporting system, for simplicity, will be the practice keeper that districts are currently familiar with and currently using. Commission has an obligation to do program evaluations and quality control. And again, we can delegate certain duties and responsibilities to districts and Penn States and other cooperating organizations and entities. We do have an obligation to report by law to the legislature annually. And we do have an obligation, which is kind of unique to ACAP, that if any county conservation district chooses not to implement the program under a delegation, the commission has a duty to carry the program out in that county. A unique obligation that where a district doesn't step up, we have to figure out how to carry out the program in that county and how to offer it. We do have some benefits in here. The commission does have the ability under the statute to take 4% for admin, and we do have the ability to take 4% for contractual services. So the commission was provided some resources to be able to carry this out. As we go through and we talk about this, the nature of this program, if you're thinking of dirt and gravel roads and you're familiar with it, this is a piece of legislation that was drafted very similar to and very consistent with the concepts of the dirt and gravel road program. So as we talk about this, if you want to put something in the back of your mind, think about dirt and gravel roads as we go through this. So the law does have some criteria for how the commission does need to allocate funds. And again, very similar to dirt gravel roads, that has some criteria embedded in the legislation. But we must apportion funds based on a written apportionment criteria. And as we develop that criteria, there's 4 things that the legislature told us that we need to consider. That's agriculturally impaired stream miles in a county, number of cropland acres in a county, number of farms in a county, number of livestock and poultry in the county, and any other criteria that the commission would choose to add to those 4 criteria. And we'll show you a spreadsheet for an initial draft of an allocation or an apportionment. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So for conservation districts, the law is very clear that they have some duties, and those include that if you're going to carry out the program, you have to carry it out consistent with commission guidelines. You would have to enter into a delegation agreement. You would need to, by law, to review complete applications and act on those within 90 days. So there's a time parameter in the law for review and action on applications. As a district, you would need to enter into agreements with successful applicants. You would need to oversee those agreements, verify the completion and the certification of the BMPs, reimburse the participants. And the law says that you may form an advisory committee, similar to something like the quality assurance boards that you have for dirt gravel roads, but you may form an advisory committee to assist in this. Some parameters in regards to the district's use of the funds. Basically, you have these funds provided to you to provide financial and technical assistance to the ACAP participants. And that's the normal course of business is, establishing procedures, reviewing and ranking of applications, entering into agreements, providing technical assistance, all the things that would come along with needing to implement these types of practices on farms. So some pretty broad parameters for what you can use the funding for. There are a number of things that are specific about constraints in the program or allowances in the program. And based on the enabling legislation, it does say that the funds that are provided to a district may roll over into a following year. So there's a 2-year window on these funds. But it does say that any funds, and this is by law, any funds allocated to a district must be spent within 2 years from receipt. And the commission does have a commitment or a requirement in the law that any funds that are unspent by a district after 2 years, the law says that they shall be redistributed after that 2-year window based on our written criteria. So the districts do have a specific authorization in the Act for up to 6% for administrative funding. The Act is silent on technical assistance, and the commission needs to set a limit on the technical assistance portion of this. And the staff at the last commission meeting made a recommendation. It hasn't been acted on, but we made the recommendation that that percentage be set at 14%. So 6% for admin that you could take off the top, similar to dirt and gravel roads. Recommendation of 14% for technical assistance. And there's also provisions similar to CEG that we would be looking at of allowing a portion of the actual grant agreement to be used for technical assistance for private sector and or other entities outside of the district. So the law does have some parameters for evaluation of ACAP applications. So the commission and the guidelines will have to work with districts to set up criteria for the review and approval of these grants. Number of them there are the BMPs must meet the goals of any applicable WIP or CAP plan. So it's for practices that fall within those county action plans. The BMP must be a part of a plan that the farmer has, whether it be an Ag E&S plan or a manure management plan, a nutrient management plan, or a conservation plan. So if they are applying for something for ACAP, it should be part of a larger plan that's been written, reviewed, and approved, and contains that BMP. We're obligated to prioritize BMPs that control nitrogen, phosphorus, or sediment. So while there may be other things out there we may want to think about or consider, priority is supposed to be given to those that reduce nutrients and sediment. Similar to the REAP requirements, any applicant who has an animal concentration area, that area either must be treated prior to applying for ACAP, or it must be included, the ACAs must be included as a part of the application for the ACAP funding that they're looking for. So ACAs are prioritized, saying that anyone who's going to get ACAP money has to either have dealt with and resolved their ACA problems, or at least have that in the application as a part of their application for the ACAP funding. We also do have a requirement by law that we have to consider the proximity to surface waters, public drinking water sources, karst geology with underground drainage systems, or open sinkholes. This is a criteria that we're not quite sure how we're going to address. So we're soliciting thoughts and ideas, not only from district, but also from partners like NRCS and Penn State and others, to how can we best do that? Certainly we could go out and walk the ground and do some of that, but there ought to be a way we can do that through some systems that are out there and some technology that's out there. And finally, any other criteria that the district and or the commission would consider important in the review and the evaluation of the application. So we can add to that list that's in the law, but we can't take away from it. So there might be other things that might be important in your county, and the commission and the guidelines may potentially add to or take away from that, or add to that list in the future. So I inserted this little diagram here. Everything we've talked about in the first 3 pages of this document, which you have, is part of the enabling legislation. So this is basically a paraphrase of the key portions of the 6 or 7 pages of the enabling legislation. And that's kind of the outline and the parameters of things that we have to deal with that we can't necessarily change. What we're going to talk about from this point forward is beginning to be some of the policy interpretations. So as we move through pages 4 through 10, we'll begin talking about how we're beginning to interpret some of what's in the enabling legislation and how we envision making this work in counties in Pennsylvania. So one of the important things is we'll have to apportion funding. And this page talks about how we envision apportioning funding. And we have 2 phrases related to funding. We have apportionment and we have allocations. The apportionment would be taking that $141 million that we have available to allocate or to provide to districts and to carve it up into county or apportionments that would give you an idea of your big picture number of how much of this fund you would have access to over the course of the next 4 to 5 years. So the apportionment is just a big picture number to give you an idea in your county, the resources that you would have available to work with. We'll talk a little bit later about an allocation, and that would be taking your apportionment and breaking it up into 3 pieces and allocating it out. And there's reasons for that we'll talk about. But let's talk first about the apportionment. So given the parameters of what we have, this is a one-time allocation that the funds have to be committed by the end of December 2024, and they have to be spent by the end of 2026. And the parameters of the 4% the commission is provided for administrative, 4% for contractual. The requirement that we have to commit and spend this funding within 2 years from the time that the districts receive it. And a requirement that the commission has that if the money is unspent, that we have to reapportion it after that time frame. So the middle of the page there, given all these parameters, this is the apportionment methodology that the commission is looking at that we presented to the commission as a part of our last meeting. So we would first take and reserve the 4% that's provided for administration for the program through the commission, set that aside. We take the 4% contractual that's possible for the commission, reserve that and set that aside. And once we do that, that leaves $141,680,000 that could be apportioned to county conservation districts. And we're recommending that this be done over the next 3 years. So we would take that money, and we have given you a spreadsheet, and we use the miles of ag impaired streams. We've used the acres of cropland, we've used the number of farms, and we've used the number of livestock and poultry, put that into a funding formula spreadsheet, weighted those equally, and set as one criteria that we did establish above those 4 criteria, established a minimum $300,000 apportionment to any county. And as we did this, we ran those numbers and came up with a spreadsheet. So again, a county would have anywhere from $300,000 over the next 4.5 years in total, upwards to some counties receiving several million or millions of dollars that would come through based on that formula. So this is the apportionment. It's kind of the big picture number of what your county would have available to you over the course of the next several years. And it would be the number that your county would have to work with. The second piece of this puzzle is the allocation of those funds. So given the fact that we have to put this money out in a fashion that once the district receives the money, they have 2 years from the date of receipt to spend it. Commission staff, in thinking about the parameters that we have, came up with this apportionment and allocation methodology. Again, the apportionment is, how much money do you have to work with? It gives you that reasonable certainty that in our county, as we think about this program over the next 4 to 5 years, our apportionment is the big picture number of what do we have to work with. The second number is your allocation number, and that would be an allocation each year for the next 3 years, which takes that apportionment and basically divides it by 3, and then would provide that to districts in each of the next 3 fiscal years. So this does a couple things. One, it gives us the ability to give you a chunk of money to work with. It gives you the ability to have 2 years from the date of receipt to be able to commit and spend that funding. And it gives you the ability to, manage these funds over time. Even though we've gotten a one-time allocation, given the spending parameters, we think that this window of a 3-year allocation is appropriate. The other piece of this is that we would do is we would give, this is a policy decision, and we have to work through and make sure we get approval from all the powers to be, but 50% advance working capital with your first allocation in order to make sure that you had funding available. As these projects come to completion, you can begin paying bills, and it would give you the money in hand to be able to work with. Again, consistent with dirt and gravel roads, also consistent with conservation excellence grants. So the chart that's there basically gives you an outline of what a potential allocation would look like. And I always like to use Franklin County. Their numbers in the apportionment are pretty round and even. They're looking at about $6 million in Franklin County based on the spreadsheet that in the formula that we developed. There'd be an allocation between now and the end of the year, hopefully this year. That would be the initial allocation, and in a place like Chester or in a place like Franklin, that would be $2 million. That's the 6 million divided by 3. We would give you the advance working capital of 50%. And you would then, from the time of receipt of that funding, have 2 years to commit and to spend that funding. About this time next year, July, first quarter of next year, we would do an allocation number 2. And again, once you receive that funding, you would have 2 years from the time of receipt to be able to spend that funding. And again, in fiscal year 24-25, first quarter, we'd be looking at a third allocation. And you would again have 2 years to commit and spend. And also there's the hard stop there that by 2024 December, we need to make sure that all of this funding is committed both at the state and the local level. So once you get that last allocation, if no additional funding were to come through with this program, and that's the assumption of this basic chart, that we have a block of money to work with, you would have that last 2 years to be able to commit and spend that funding. And then we would be working on closing out and doing the reporting and everything that's required on that. My assumption is, and the indication that we get from the legislature is, they didn't create this just to let it die in 4 or 5 years. They created it to continue on. So it's going to be important as we work through that we do everything we can to make sure that we commit and spend this funding in a timely fashion. So I will say that similar to dirt and gravel roads, in each of those cycles, we will be looking at a district's performance. So if you get an annual allocation and you spend it down quickly and you commit it quickly, we would give you your second and subsequent allocation. If we provide you the money and you don't commit it and you don't spend it, we'll have to have a discussion about what does that look like for funding in the second and subsequent years. So this allocation and apportionment methodology is designed, one, to give you a big picture of what you will get. That's the apportionment number. And then 2, to break your allocations down into 3 pieces so that you have a good opportunity to, 1, receive the funding, and then to commit and spend that funding within that 2-year window. So that's an overview of the apportionment and the allocation methodology that we're looking at. Again, think about dirt gravel roads, very similar to that. Eric, do we want to put the spreadsheet up for the apportionment before we get going through the rest of this?
Yeah, we can do that real quick. All right.
So this is a sample spreadsheet put together based on the 4 criteria that are outlined in the legislation. You can see those in the column AE. We weighted those equally at 25% for each factor. And then as we said, commission staff is recommending that we put a minimum in here for the apportionment of $300,000 per county that would participate. So this is a draft. This is not final, but it's to give you an idea of what we're thinking and what we've recommended to commission. Our hope would be that we go back to the commission in November to finalize this, but this would give you an indication in your county of where you stand as far as the total amount of money that would be available to you over the next 4.5 to 5 years. This would be what we would call your apportionment number. And then your allocation number would simply be take this number divided by 3, and that would be the amount that you would get each year for the next 3 years. So you can see it ranges anywhere in 15 million and change for a county like Lancaster, down to 300,000 for, I think it's 6 or 8 counties at the other end of the spectrum, and everybody else spread somewhere in between. So again, this is 4 criteria weighted equally with a $300,000 minimum in order to give districts that big picture idea of what number do we have to work with over the next 4 to 5 years. And then the allocation simply is your apportionment divided by 3, and you would get that in 3 equal chunks over the next 3 years. So you do have that. Would encourage you to take a look at that. And I think it's good, one, that the criteria is in the law, makes life simpler for everyone. And 2, we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. You know, we ran through and weighted different things in different ways, but the criteria are pretty equally important. And so we rank them equally in this recommendation to the commission. So that's the
Just to give
spreadsheet. Eric, anything on that?
Yeah, just to give them a little bit of background information where the numbers came from. The numbers for the stream miles, the ag and parish stream miles, came from a list that was provided from DEP, and the cropland acres, the farms and AAUs, that came from the 2017 ag census. It's just to give them some information where that all came from.
Okay. Eric, you want to bounce back to the advisory committee section of the document? So we do have an advisory committee that we put together. It's met for the last every 2 weeks for the last month and a half or so. And you can see the list there, folks from districts in Crawford, Washington, Bradford, Lycoming, Franklin, Lancaster, Luzerne, Chester counties. We also have NRCS representatives on the group. We have a few private sector TSPs on the group, DEP representatives, PACD, Penn State, Farm Bureau, and Chesapeake Bay Foundation are some of the folks that sit on that group. So we've been doing a call with them every 2 weeks to kind of update them and bounce stuff off of them. But we intend to keep that group together as we stand this program up, and use that group as a sounding board and as an opportunity for input to the program. So for those that are serving on that, we appreciate you taking the time to do that, and greatly appreciate your involvement in helping to shape this program. So the next discussion is kind of a thought about, you know, what are the opportunities to do this at the county level as far as the financial assistance? And really there's 2 options by law for doing this. Either a conservation district will step up and accept a delegation, or the commission or its agent must administer the funding program at the county level. So really two opportunities, the districts or the commission or its agent. And I think there's some opportunities there to think creatively in how this is done. But we've had about 3 years experience in the Conservation Excellence Grants, working with 7 districts in South Central PA. And one of the things that we found is flexibility is vitally important. So as we go through and we look at this, the reason that we were able to put these documents together and to stand this up at this point in time for review and comment is because these documents and this process looks an awful lot like our Conservation Excellence Grants program. So if you want to talk to a district that's in that program and ask them how that has gone for the last 3 years, I would encourage you to do that. But flexibility is something that's going to be key, because each district is enabled differently. So they may have to take a different approach to how they do this. And so if a district does step up to do this, I think there's a couple of things that we see. Certainly they could do this on their own. They could step up and administer the program and run it with their own resources. We think that if a district, especially if they're a medium or a small district, is looking at this saying, man, this is going to be tough for us to do individually, there may be opportunities to do this in a multi-county or a cooperative venture with other districts. So we have seen in things like nutrient management and other programs where districts in the past have come together, you know, Bradford, Sullivan, and multi-county regions in like Union, Northumberland, Snyder, and those counties have come together in the past. So certainly a district could look at doing this cooperatively with other districts in a multi-county region to make it work for those counties. Some counties may look at this and say, you know, we're scheduled to get 300,000 or 400,000 in the entire program. Some of you may want to simplify some of the BMPs that are offered in order to focus on some particular things. You may want to go at some of the low end stuff like cover crops and stream corridor practices, livestock exclusion, grazing related practices, so that you don't have some of the high end engineering that you would have to wrestle with or deal with. So certainly you could, in a smaller county, simplify the BMPs that are offered and run a program that's focused on some particular aspects of CEG. And then there's always the opportunity to explore cooperative ventures with projects that NRCS has on the books or getting ready to go. There are unfunded EQIP projects and RCP projects that sit in their files that potentially could be funded. We do know that they have some producers who have pulled back from existing agreements because of the lack of available funding that they would need that would come out of their pocket. So there may be the opportunity to supplement an existing agreement for EQIP with some ACAP money. And also, you know, looking at this, if you have a producer with an NRCS agreement that's ready to step back because they can't afford the out-of-pocket cost, you know, this may be able to keep that producer at the table, to allow EQIP to do what they do, and then to supplement and to bring that project to completion that might otherwise just sit and or the farmer may walk away from that agreement. So certainly opportunities to look at cooperative ventures and interactions and cooperation with NRCS. And then there's always the opportunity to look at cooperative ventures with private sector type of entities, whether it be for-profit or nonprofit. But the bottom line is the funding aspect of this program has to either be done by a district stepping up under a delegation, or it has to be done by the commission stepping in and looking at how to do it in place of a district. I will say that as a commission, we have limited staff. We did get authority to fund some positions. But I think in my mind, the first thing that we would be looking at if one district chose not to do this would be to see if there would be a neighboring district that would be willing to step up and potentially help run that program in a neighboring county. So the financial assistance stuff, you know, we need to think about, and districts need to think about how they're going to do that in their programs. Technical assistance is probably going to be one of the biggest challenges in this program. You know, we are looking at standing up a program in Pennsylvania that's about equivalent to NRCS's EQIP program currently. Now they're scheduled to get some additional funding that will take their EQIP dollars and other dollars up substantially, I think, in the next couple of years. But this is a fairly significant program to stand up. So for technical assistance, for a district that enters into a delegation agreement, again, I think flexibility is going to be the key. And certainly I think, again, that if a district that has this pretty significant allocation, they may choose to directly employ their staff and to carry out the program, to train them and get them up and running. It will be important that they employ adequate numbers of technicians and or engineers and that they're capable of providing these services. So I can envision a number of counties that would run this program pretty much on their own and stand it up with the resources that they have. You could choose to partner with private sector and or nonprofits for certain aspects of this program for technical assistance. And so there are opportunities to use private sector to come in and do some of the engineering and other work that's part of this program. And again, you could choose to partner with NRCS if you have that existing relationship and it works well. and you can manage to integrate these projects together and get the job done from a technical assistance standpoint, certainly partnering with NRCS is something that you want to take a close look at. And the bottom line is, there may be a combination of all this in any given county. You may have staff doing some of your own. You may use private sector on certain agreements or contracts. And certainly NRCS will have an opportunity to step up and assist in certain places. I will mention as a part of the technical assistance that the Commission and PDA is in the process of finalizing agreement with NRCS. NRCS is looking at putting on 5 additional engineers in their tech centers to help do some of this work. And the department and the commission will be picking up a portion of the cost of that, cost of those 5 engineers in order to help NRCS as they expand that technical capacity. So looking forward to that, working hard to get all the signatures and the finalizations on those agreements. And so hopefully we'll have some additional resources immediately available through that. Staffing recommendations, we did go through and take a look at staffing. The good news is, 1, we have some money to do this, and 2, PDA did provide us the complement to be able to go out and to hire staff. So we're in the process of finalizing position descriptions for 10 positions. And we've already put some of those into the system for the process to begin to do the hiring. And we have about 6 positions left that we have to finalize position descriptions and figure out where we're potentially going to place those. But the good news is we do have, 1, the resources financially to fill some positions, and 2, we have the approval to have the complement to be able to fill those positions. So in the state system, you have to have both money and approval to hire. So we have both of those. We're trying to move forward on that. So challenges, these are just kind of some generic things. The time frame for standing this up and the hard stops at the end of 2024 and 2026 are certainly challenges. Ramping up statewide in a short period of time is a challenge. Both technical assistance and planning capacities are going to be something that's important. Something as simple as finding contractors that are willing and available and qualified to do the work is going to be a challenge. And everybody knows that steel and concrete and wood and all the things that go into these projects has absolutely gone through the roof in the last number of years. So dealing with the cost of these projects is going to be a challenge. Opportunities, the law does provide both the districts and the commissions some funds to be able to do this work. One of the opportunities is the contractual money that we have is to be able to go out and take a look at and see how we can supplement district resources to be able to provide technical support and training. Certainly, we believe that we can articulate and coordinate these ACAP funds with other sources of fundings, whether that be CEG or REAP or AgriLink or EQIP or RCPP, Growing Greener, DEP CAP funds. Our hope is that we can articulate these things and use these in a way that makes this work more smoothly rather than having these funds compete. And finally, the technical assistance challenges are going to be really significant. So with that, the timeline is there. We spent the first quarter basically trying to figure out what the law said, tried to figure out what it might look like, convene the advisory committee, and began the process of requesting to be able to fill positions for this program. So really the first 3 months of this was trying to sort through and figure out what this is. We had a goal of going to the commission in September with our initial draft of guidelines, delegations, and ROMs, as well as the allocations and apportionments. And we did that. We took that to the commission. And while they recognize these documents are not perfect, they're in good enough shape that we felt comfortable putting them out for comment, period. So they did go out to districts the end of last week, I believe, or early this week. And you have an opportunity to take a look at those documents and to review them and to comment on those. Again, I would urge you to understand that, this is our first draft. They aren't complete by any means. There's actually some holes in there where we think there's some questions that would be benefit from input from districts. So we've solicited comments on those documents. Our hope is to bring those back in, get the comments cleaned up, clean up the documents based on the comments, and get those those documents back to the commission in November so that we can begin moving this process forward of one, making the apportionments, and for those districts that are interested in doing this program, getting the delegations out for the districts to be able to sign and begin getting this process ready so that early next calendar year, you'll have funding that should be available and potentially available for a spring construction season. If you had a shovel-ready project that was eligible, or if you had an applicant that came forward that was eligible, you could begin potentially spending this funding next spring, but most likely it's going to be a summer, fall ramp up for most districts unless you're ready and prepared to be able to stand this thing up quickly. So again, that's our basic speaking points on ACAP. You have a copy of this. I re-emphasize that the first 3 pages are things that are basically the enabling legislation. The last 6 pages are about the way that we're looking at interpreting and some other things related to the program. So that's our overview of ACAP. We have one other document that we want to share with you. Eric, can you pull up that example that we have? So I'm going to let Eric go through most of this, but the thought was we need to begin thinking about how does this program roll out in a county and what does it look like? And for managers, generally the first questions they have is, how much money do I have? When is the money coming? What kind of parameters come with it? So one of the things that as you begin looking at this program in your county is you need to understand the administrative and the technical assistance funds that may be available to you in order to begin rolling this out. So I'll let Eric walk through this and I'll take a break and just give you an idea of how you might start dissecting what we provided and thinking about what this might look like within your county.
All right, so let's run through some of the technical assistance numbers. First, we have the apportionment. That is the big number that we give you guys. It's the total ACAP funds that any participating in conservation district will receive for the ACAP program. Like Carl said, we will give you an annual allocation for the next 3 years. That is, just divide that big number by 3, and that will give you your annual allocation. And then you have 2 years to spend that allocation once you receive that. So we'll take a quick look at Franklin County. I know we're going to pick on them quite a bit because, well, their numbers are easy to look at. So Franklin County, in this example, we get just a little over $6 million in your apportionment, and you're looking at $2 million over the next 3 years for their annual allocation. Since the enabling legislation gives them 6% for admin, they're looking at a total of $368,323. And if you break that out over 5 years, they're basically getting $74,000 in admin money each year for the next 5 years. Also, there's allowance for technical assistance. So we're looking at up to 14% for technical assistance, though they'd be looking at just about $860,000 or $171,000 over the next 5 years. So in conclusion, Franklin County would receive just a little over $6 million for ACAP funds, and that has to be spent over the next 4.5 years. So their annual allocation would be basically $2 million a year. And if they take a 5-year planning approach, they would have about $74,000 in admin costs and another $171,000 in technical assistance, or they would have $245 million per year. So we just took a large example, a large apportionment. We did a medium apportionment. All the numbers are going to run out the same. It's just simple math. A small, and then a minimum here. So you can see with the minimum, you're not looking at an awful lot of admin technical assistance money coming into your county. So that might put you in a situation as to sort of ask yourself some questions. How are we going to make this program work, and how are we going to carry it out? So you might look at some of these other entities for help, such as NRCS or anything like that. I do want to bring up before I get into these strategic questions down here. I do want to bring up the spreadsheet for you guys again. You guys all have a copy of the spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet, you'll see some tabs down here at the bottom. If you click on the yearly scope, I have already broken those numbers out for you. So if you would just want to look at yours, you can just hide everybody else's, and it'll give you the breakouts of your admin money and your technical assistance funding. So that's just the easy, so you don't have to do the calculations yourself, but I already did those calculations in the spreadsheet, so you guys all have that information handy for you. So I just wanted to show you that. Get back in here. All right, so we got all that. So here's some of the questions that we came up with. We thought that you guys might have good interest in what you might want to ask yourself. So how can you build a successful ACAP county program based on the numbers provided to you, and what makes sense for your county? We're trying to make this program as flexible as possible. So I mean, we're going to be flexible here at the State Conservation Commission. We're flexible with the CEG program. You can ask any of those other counties, and we try to make it work best for each individual county. So that's what we're going to try to do with ACAP. What opportunities are there to partner with other organizations to help with the ACAP program, and what additional resources might you need? Do you need technical assistance? Do you need to hire somebody else? These are some of the questions that you need to ask yourself. Some of the options and opportunities and strategies. Do you combine ACAP administrative and technical assistance funding with other capable funding sources such as ACT, nutrient management, EQIP, other grants, or CEG? Can you assign ACAP duties to existing agricultural support positions that you have, or are you going to have to outsource some of this technical assistance? Explore opportunities for multi-county arrangements where the combined resources of more than one county may make the ACAP program workable in your counties. So, is there a possibility that you could partner up with another county to help move this program forward? And maybe some other explore opportunities to partner with other agencies such as NRCS, maybe a nonprofit or for-profit organization. Carl, am I missing anything?
No, I think you're in good shape. I mean, these were just some questions of beginning a thought pattern for, things you need to ask yourself, things you need to be thinking about, and begin to think about what this could look like in your particular county. Because again, it's going to look different in Franklin County than it will look in Forest County. And so we want every district to have as good an opportunity to take this program on and make it work for their counties. But again, recognizing that we may have to do some things differently in different counties to help you make it work. So this was just a document to give you something to begin chewing on, and at least begin giving you some thought patterns for what resources are available to do this as a part of the enabling legislation and as a part of the commission's policy as they're currently drafted. Eric, did we have any other documents that we wanted to put up?
The only other documents we have is the guidelines, the delegation agreement, the ROMs, which they already have a copy of. I don't know if we want to go over them briefly or not, or just start taking questions. Really.
Well, let's just talk a little bit about those. We did send something out. It was sent out September 16th, I believe. That was a request for districts to provide comments on the three key documents. One is the guidelines, one is the delegation agreement, one is the ROM, and actually it's four, and then one is the spreadsheet for the funding matrix. So districts did receive each of these. These are kind of the bare bone documents that we believe we need to be able to stand the program up. We understand fully that these documents do not answer all the questions that a district may have. So if you're a district that's of a mindset and perspective that you want to know every answer to every question before you step off into a program, this is going to be a challenge for you because we don't have all the answers to every question that's out there in regards to ACAP. We're working towards that goal of answering as many questions as we can. But these documents are the basic fundamental documents that we believe we need to get the program up and running. And if you talk to CEG counties, these look very similar to and are very consistent with the CEG guidelines and documents that we do have. So one, these are our first shot at trying to get these things up and running. But given the time parameters, we can't spend the next year working on guidelines and delegations. We need to move as quickly as we can to get the money into your hands so that you can begin working on these projects and moving it forward and moving it ahead. I think overall, when we talk about the funding of this program, we have 3 years to produce a good track record of receiving the funding, committing the funding, and spending the funding. And then, we're going to be working hard with the legislature, throughout this process, but mostly in the last 2 years of this funding to make sure that they have additional funding that comes in to backfill the program. Personally, I wish this was funded like dirt gravel roads, where we had a number that was 28 million for the next, umpteen years until they change it. But unfortunately, they funded it the way that they funded it. So we need to develop the program in a way that we can be responsive to that. So these are the key documents. The guidelines are basically a paraphrase of much of what the law says. The delegation is a fairly standard delegation. It's very consistent with the CEG delegation. And I think most districts are familiar with, the basics of the delegation kind of sets the broad parameters. The ROMs are what we expect to be specifically delivered. So we would ask you to take a look at those. Eric, is there anything in particular in the guidelines that we want to point out?
I got one highlighted right now is the 14%. That's not in the enabling legislation. The 14% we came up with to give the districts an even 20% across the board for admin and technical assistance money. That could be up for debate if you want to comment on that. If you think that's too little or too much or whatever, feel free to comment on that. Trying to think the other one is down in section 10.
Is that the setting a cap on the award?
Yeah.
There's a provision in here that we haven't decided yet. In CEG, we set a cap of 250,000, and I can't remember if that's by legislation or if that was by policy. But we did in CEG set 200,000. I'm sorry, 250,000. So the same question applies here. The act is silent on that. So the question would be, is it useful to set a cap? Or should we leave that decision of what the cap should be up to the counties? So far, what we've heard in different calls and different input is most districts that we've heard from said, we don't think a cap is appropriate. It all depends on what your program is going to look like. If you have $4 or $6 million, you may be looking at things like ag waste storages and covered roofs, areas and that type of stuff. If you have $300,000, you certainly won't be looking at that. So a cap in those parameters doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense at the state level.
Yeah, that was a policy decision in CEG. That wasn't in the enabling legislation of CEG. So that was a policy that we decided to set.
So encourage you to take a look at those, take a look at the guidelines. Again, these are bare bones, and they will be fleshed out with administrative manuals and other stuff as we move forward. But that's the basic guideline. If we want to get up and get running, these are the basic things that we think we need to have in place at an absolute minimum. Again, the delegation, take a look at that. The one thing I will say in the delegation, as we look at this, and I'm not sure if it's the delegation or the ROMs, I guess it's the ROMs. One thing that we do have in the ROMs is that the expectation would be that if you are going to do ACAP, and if someone comes to you and part of their project involves REAP or involves AgriLink, there's some basic things that districts would need to be doing. Technically, you probably are doing these already if a producer comes to you, but the verification of the REAP application, that they have their plans and all the stuff that goes along with the district reviewing and verifying information for REAP. And AgriLink, I think we have 4 or 5 AgriLink loans that have just come through in this second round. So if a producer came to you and needed a certification on the AgriLink saying, is the BMP a part of a plan? Yes, it is. Is the BMP cost that has been provided reasonable? Yes, it is. Those are all things that we would expect that if you're running ACAP, you would also be providing those services as a part of your overall ACAP effort. And I think that's all we had in those particular documents. So please take a look at them. Provide as many comments as you believe is appropriate, and understand that we're doing the best we can to be able to answer very specific questions. But if the question is a certain BMP going to be allowed, in the program? I would say one thing is take a look at REAP and take a look at CEG. Both of those have lists online, or we can provide them to you. In both of those programs, we tried to be as broad as we could. We started with NRCS practices, and we looked at removing simply any that would not be related to nutrients or sediment. We did that for both REAP and CEG. The other thing for ACAP, if you look at the REAP list, is certainly equipment is not something that's eligible under ACAP. That's unique to REAP. So would encourage you to take a look at and to comment on those documents. Anything else, Eric?
I think that covers everything.
So we did have a number of questions in the chat, and Frank and or Eric, you guys are both on there. As I'm going down through, I think some of these we have covered. Initially, there was a comment from Dean Druckenmiller. Is the ACAP documented 9/2022 the same as the 8/16/22 version? I would say, Dean, it is. The only thing I added was that graphic for the enabling legislation and the policy that's on the bottom of page 3. I think that's the only thing I added because I was getting tired of writing that in on my documents. Wanted to put that in to make sure that that was part of the overall speaking points. There's a question here. Does the 2-year from the time of receipt imply 24 full months from the date of the funding arrives, or until the end of the following fiscal year? I would say, Eric, we're thinking 24 full months from the date that you receive it is currently what we're interpreting. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Mary had asked, if 1 year spend is over our allocation, can we be reimbursed for additional funds? Mary, if what you're asking is for a county, say that's getting $300,000 in total, and you get $100,000 in the first year, if you could spend $200,000 or $300,000 in the first year, could you receive that money in that first year or first and second year? I think our goal is to get the money to you and into projects and on the ground in a timely fashion. So we would be open to that discussion. I think we'd be supportive of giving you an advance on future years, understanding that, once you spent your apportioned money of $300,000 or $1 million or whatever it may be, once you spend that, there's no additional funding guaranteed beyond that. But certainly if a district is organized and up and running and can take their total apportionment and do it in less than 3 fiscal years, we would consider providing some of that funding that if you have projects ready to go. Eric, anything on that question?
It looks like it might be about the same as the one that Dean brought up as well.
Yep, and then Dean asked basically that same question again.
Yep.
So the hard stop for commitment of funds, December 2024. How does that work with 3 allocations? So if I remember looking at that chart, and I have it here somewhere, one of the things that we need to get clarifications on, and we're interpreting commitment as being in a contract and committed to someone. We're saying that you would be looking at trying to get that money committed in the last cycle by the 2024. If we can get you more flexibility for that, we will. But right now, without lack of interpretation of that term committed, we're saying that yes, you're going to get that money in July of 2024, and you need to be working extra hard to make sure you get that committed to a contract by the end of the calendar year. Again, if we could get additional flexibility there, we'll be looking at that, but that's the way we're interpreting it currently. Dean asked, can unspent admin or TA be put forward to BMP implementation? I would say similar to dirt and gravel roads, if you don't use all your TA or your admin and you want to put that into a project, we would be fine with that. We would have no problem with that.
Yeah, it's easier to move money from admin over to BMPs than it is the other way. Just when you guys are thinking about budgets and stuff like that, when we get to that point, just keep that in mind.
Okay. So a comment by Jill, if it hasn't already been said, it's important for the districts to know that the SCC and DEP have been meeting to try to keep things simple and ensure complementary programs. I believe Commission has had the view to develop the policies for ACAP to align with CEG as much as possible. So yeah, we're not hiding. This is going to look an awful lot like CEG. CEG gave us a 3-year experience to be able to get this up and get it running. So ACAP and CEG will be very similar, although there's a couple of quirks in their enabling legislation that are different. But certainly we're looking for these funds to fit with and integrate with other sources of funding, whether that be CEG or be CAP money that's provided by DEP or Growing Greener or others. We want this money to work with other funding sources and not just be competing with other funding sources. So can technical assistance apportionment be used to pay for private sector? So if the question is, if a district gets an apportionment and they take their 14% for technical assistance, if the question is, can I use money that would be made available for my district staff to do technical assistance? Could I go to the private sector and purchase that technical assistance? I don't see why not. Eric, is there anything that you can think of that would prohibit us from allowing a district to use their technical assistance funding to purchase services outside of the district?
No, there's nothing there that would keep us from funding that.
And in fact, probably CEG has done that.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, is funding subject to prevailing wage? At this point in time, we're assuming that it is, but that's something that we're continuing to try to work through both Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage to make sure we have a good answer to it. But at this point in time, the assumption until we can prove otherwise would be that it's subject to prevailing wage. And that's not necessarily something that we can control. Josh had asked, is there a match requirement by the farmer? Eric, you want to take a shot at that one?
Right now, there is nothing in the enabling legislation about any match, whether it's 75, 25, 90, 10, or whatever. Our thoughts is we want to try to keep a as flexible as possible. We are open to comments on how each district feels about that. I know some of our cooperating agencies would like to keep it aligned with some of their other programs. But right now, there's nothing in there stating that there's any requirement from the farmer.
As we worked with the 7 counties for CEG, I think they cooperatively decided initially that 75% was kind of the target to shoot for. But I do know that a number of CEG counties have looked at taking that and moving that up to a higher percentage that they would provide. So that's a question that's open for comment. I know NRCS has been vocal and very upfront about saying, please don't put us at a competitive disadvantage. So we need to find ways where we can make it that this money, again, can be complementary and supportive, and try to avoid situations where we're just simply competing for the farmers that are out there. We need to direct farmers to the best source of funding that they can get for a particular type of a practice. And maybe, again, that means maybe you stay away from ag waste storages and covered roofs structures. If EQIP is best suited to do that in your county, and you guys want to focus on something other than that, maybe that's something that you need to take a look at. So right now in CEG, that's an open question that we have left up to the local level. And I know it's a question that's being wrestled with currently. So good thing to comment on. Question from Ed McGargy. That is only for the first year allocation, not all 3-year allocations, or would Franklin County need to commit all $6 million by December 2024? Currently, under the most constrained view of commitment, yes, by December 2024, we would expect that a county would have all of their ACAP funds committed to an agreement in order to be spent by 2026. So until we could get an interpretation otherwise, committed by December 31st of 2024 is that you have an agreement in hand, that you have a producer that has stepped up, made an application, and is willing to commit to implementing BMPs for that funding. So Ryan Haar says, is there a percentage of the contract grant with the farmer for engineering similar to dirt gravel roads and townships? Eric, you want to take that one based on CEG?
Based on CEG, we allow for an additional 10% of the construction costs for engineering if the third party has to be hired out. That'd be coming out of your BMP money that you would get as part of your contracts. It wouldn't be any of your admin money per se. As far as dirt and gravel road, I'm not exactly sure how their engineering is run. So I don't know if you know any about that, Carl.
I'm going to have to claim ignorance because right now my mind is just swimming with other details. So I do know that they do allow a percentage of the contract to go to private sector engineering, but there are some limitations on it.
Yep.
So that's what we wanted to present this morning. That's an overview of where we stand. The comments, the documents are out for comments and for review. Strongly encourage you to take a look at those documents. Strongly encourage you to begin thinking through, if you haven't done so already, how this might work in your county. Strongly encourage you to be talking with your partners, whether that be NRCS or watershed associations or whoever it may be, private sector service providers that you work with. Would strongly encourage you to begin discussions about how could this work best in your given county, and begin thinking about this, because when we get to November and we get hopefully approval on these delegations and apportionments and others, we're going to be asking you, are you in or are you out, at least for this first calendar year or first fiscal year? So you will not have a tremendous amount of time to think and contemplate. I think we're going to ask you fairly quickly to jump in or jump out mostly because we have an obligation to provide it if you don't. So begin these discussions in your counties, start thinking about this, review these documents, provide comments. I'd urge you to keep those comments as productive and as focused as possible. Recognize that we're trying the best we can to get the answers that you need, but we may not have all the answers, by the time the end of the comment period comes up. So with that, if anybody wanted to jump online, I'd be willing to open this up. If anybody wanted to raise a hand for any verbal comments, questions, reactions, anything that anybody want to do, because we do have some time. And I see Dave Stoner. Dave, can you unmute yourself, or do we have to do that for you?
Oh, I tried. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So when can districts start charging staff time to ACAP?
I think our thought process is that we can take a delegation agreement and take it back to the date of the enabling legislation, which I think was like July 8th or something like that. That's our current thought, that delegation could reach back and could allow that. We've done that under other contracts, and I wouldn't see why we couldn't do that under this one. I will give you that that's what we're shooting for, Dave. But as everything else, it has to go through a whole bunch of approvals to get to that point.
Okay. And another comment there on the match or cost share rate. There's a number of us CEG counties currently going to 90-10. So be awful advantageous if we could keep CEG same as ACAP. If we start getting different cost share, it's gonna it'd be a mess.
So Dave, you've been in CEG now better part of 3 years. Your general experience with that, and how has it worked in Franklin County for you?
It's going great. We're just crazy busy. It concerns me here with all this amount of money coming in, how we're gonna get that spent, but we're gonna try to gear up here and be ready to go. So, but it's the other counties that aren't in it, it's not too cumbersome to work with. Like you say, got to keep it simple and flexible, and that's very appreciated.
I remember a conversation I had with Dave early on in CEG, and his basic comment was, we're working really hard to get plans on the shelf, to get producers in the queue, so when the money becomes available, we can move forward with it. So that has worked well so far in the first 3 years in Franklin County. And if you wanted to look for a model to replicate, Dave and his folks have done very well with the CEG in Franklin County. So Eric, who else do we have that has hands up?
Lance.
Yeah, just wondering, will there be any kind of a primer for expenses for admin and technical assistance?
So Lance, I would say that as we move forward, yes, there will be guidance on those types of things. Eric, do we have that guidance in CEG?
Yes, I do believe so.
So it may be a case that we just haven't gotten to the point of retooling those to make sure that the CEG documents are consistent with anything we put out for ACAP. But again, yeah, we would look at, administrative documents coming out. We would be looking at administrative manuals potentially coming out. So, those types of questions and details are going to come after we at least get these basic documents up in the program functioning. But yeah, you'll certainly get guidance on what's eligible for administrative and or technical funding.
Thank you.
I think I saw one or two others with hands up.
Yeah, we got Heather with a hand up.
Heather?
Just a couple quick questions. We currently have some equip contracts that are under contracts and currently under construction. Would these funds be eligible to supplement those kinds of projects, in the initial year?
So it's an existing equip that's currently under construction.
Correct.
And the question is, could these funds come in and supplement potentially that EQIP contract?
Yes.
Depending on the answer to the question that was asked earlier, how far back can you do this? It's potential that you could go back and do that. The downside of that, Heather, just thinking out loud, is you need to be reviewing these potential applications and offering this money, you know, to all interested parties. You would need to be looking at reviewing that potential application to be consistent with the criteria for review and approval of an application.
Okay.
So I would say, similar to dirt and gravel roads, you're going to need a policy that says, here's how we're going to take applications, here's when we take applications, and here's how we're going to review and evaluate a potential application.
Okay, and then similarly to dirt and gravel roads, will districts be creating those guidelines for, you know, local control? How do we take those applications? Do we create the application, or will there be like a standard application?
In CEG, I believe we have a standard application, Eric?
Yeah, we sent out a template for standard application. Some districts might have changed it a little bit depending on what their priorities and stuff are, and some of the questions they might want to ask. So there is a little bit of flexibility to change it, but we do send out a template application.
Okay. It sounds like you're probably looking to kind of model after that same sort of thing. Is there a possibility that you could send out that application so we kind of get a feel for what we're looking at?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of updating all the applications and creating templates for the ACAP application. So that's one of the documents that I'm working on right now. So as soon as I get it done, I'm sure I'll be able to send it out.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Heather. Mary?
Yeah, I just want to check my understanding. So as it stands right now, 6% for admin, 14% for technical assistance, and then we can use up to 10% of contractual or construction funds for contractual engineering. Is that correct?
That is what staff has proposed at this time, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Just understand that as you talk to legislatures, their view will not be how much can I use to cover all these costs. Their view will be how much money can we get on the ground in BMPs and not have tremendous overhead. So you need to find that balance of doing what you need to do and getting reimbursed for it, but not getting to a point where when we go to the legislature and ask for additional fundings that we have a hard time justifying why we're asking for the money, because their view might be different than ours on those types of things. So
right. Well, the reason I asked was I was initially thinking that the engineering would have to come out of the TA.
It could, but it doesn't have to.
Okay. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
If you want to look at it, if you would hire somebody or contract somebody at the district level, that's where your engineering costs would come out of your TA. So if you would hire a third party, then you could take it out of the contractual for the BMPs. Does that make it easier for you?
Yes. I know there's some things that we can do at the district level, but others that we'll need engineering for.
Yep.
Thanks.
Yep.
Holly?
Hi, Carl. I just had two questions about the financial logistics, and we had asked Karen Books during the manager summit. I don't know if she got a chance to talk to you yet. Do you want a separate savings account set up to receive the ACAP funds, just like we do with dirt and gravel?
I'm gonna default at this point in time because these are federal ARPA funds, and we just last week were part of a discussion with the fiscal folks about what the reporting and accounting requirements are. I would say the safest thing at this point in time is to assume that there'll be a separate fund.
Okay.
But if we can move towards a separate accounting of funds, then we will do that. But I think right now the assumption, probably be conservative and say that you're going to need to set up a separate account for these funds.
Okay. And then are we going to be paying farmers directly, or are we paying contractors? Is this reimbursement to the farmer?
The enabling legislation is a reimbursement program to the applicant. That said, there are ways to do assignment agreements and other things that may be able to give you some leeway. But this program is envisioned as an ag operation receiving a reimbursement after they do a certain practice. And the language is very specific that it is a reimbursement program. So you might be able to do some assignments for contractors, but at this point in time, simply paying contractors directly and bypassing the ag operation, we would have to look at the legality of being able to do that.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Eric, do we have anybody else with a hand that's up?
I don't see any at this time. Oh, there's one. Lance again.
Go ahead, Lance.
Yeah, with this, I mean, I think if you're getting federal money at 750,000, you have to do like its own individual audit. Will that be required for this funding?
This is federal money, so the single audit requirement is 750,000. I'm pretty sure you'll have to do that with these funds. But that's something we can put on the list and make sure that we're clear on.
Yeah, I believe that's per year. Don't quote me if I'm wrong, but I think that's 750,000 per year. So.
Yeah, Eric, this is Karen Books. You're correct that it's 750 a year. At the management summit last week, there were some districts that said their auditors told them that these types of funds that come through the ARPA do not fall under that. So that is something that we probably need to look into.
Okay.
Other questions? So this is basically what we know to date. We've been scrambling in the last 3 months to get to this point.
Yeah.
And we're doing it primarily so that we can stand this up as quickly as we can, given the time frames for the spend down. So it's important that we do our best to get this thing up and running. And that means that probably at your next couple of board meetings, if you haven't talked about this, or your staff meetings, you need to begin talking about it, because we will be coming back to you and asking some basic questions about how do you plan to implement this in your county? What's your overall framework for what you think will work in your county? And we'll also be asking you if you're in the program or out of the program, at least for the first fiscal year, because otherwise we need to begin planning on how we could run the program either through a contractor or through commission staff in any counties that the district chooses not to participate. So encourage you to take a look at this. Tyler, there's a question there. Tyler, you should be able to unmute yourself if you're not. Okay, I thought Tyler had a comment or a question, but he might be wrestling with his technology.
He's typing in the chat. Similar to EQIP, if a farmer is contracting with a contractor and we're paying the farmer, does prevailing wage come into play?
Read that again, Eric.
Similar to EQIP, if a farmer is contracting with a contractor and we're paying the farmer, does prevailing wage come into play?
We're going to have to defer on all the prevailing wage questions that are very specific. Understand that as you discuss these types of things with NRCS is exempt from prevailing wage because of who they are, not because of how they do things. And for Davis-Bacon, how they pay farmers directly as a incentive payment versus a reimbursement may influence Davis-Bacon and or may even influence prevailing wage. They're exempt from Pennsylvania prevailing wage because of who they are, not because of what they do or how they do it. So please don't look at NRCS practices and procedures for the template of the legal decisions that we need to make in regards to prevailing wage. So we're going to have to figure that out. We're have to work with labor and industry and with our attorneys to make sure we fully understand it. And then we can give you guidance after we understand and figure that out. Eric, do we have anything else in the chat or any other hands that we have to?
I don't see anything else.
Okay. Well, we do appreciate everybody that got online. We have this recorded. We will make it available through Jill and others for use in other mediums. We are going to do this again next Tuesday. Certainly welcome if you want to come back on Tuesday. It will be the same as what we're doing here today, but you're certainly welcome to come back on and listen. In closing, just encourage you, one, take a look at the documents that have been shared. Please provide comments and understand that we have things that we just simply have to work through and think through before we can answer some of the comments. Prevailing wage is a good example, but understand that we're trying to get this up and running. We're trying to give you as much flexibility as we can, but understand that there are certain parameters within the enabling law that we have to wrestle with. There's certain parameters that we need to wrestle with because of the nature of the funds being federal funds and being provided under ARPA, which is kind of an unusual and different type of funding source. So look forward to working with districts on this. We're excited. Again, take a look at your apportionment information. That is a draft. That is not a guarantee, but that should give you an idea of what you're looking at and begin that discussion about what you think this could or might look like in your counties. And certainly if you have questions, I would encourage you to give Eric a call or an email, give me a call or an email. And I think we're going to be working with field reps to help them maybe get a better understanding of this. And certainly a field rep, if they can't answer a question for you, they can find someone who can answer the question for you. Karen or Jill, anything from the DEP side before we sign off?
You want to go here in a minute?
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing from our end.
Nothing from me.
All of the effort.
I need to call him.
Carl and his team.
Yeah, I just forgot about it. It's like, I'm not the
Forward to working with everyone.
But I did get a lot of questions.
Okay, if you would please mute because we got somebody coming through. Okay, any other questions, any other comments? If not, we'll give you a half an hour of your day back, and we appreciate everybody that jumped on, and appreciate you taking the time to walk through this with us. Thank you.